All right, everyone, welcome. We're going to go ahead and get started. We have a robust calendar, as they say, for our work session and for our general board meeting tonight. Welcome. This is our March 19th work session. The first item that we have up on our calendar today is the review of the 24-25 calendars, starting with the early college calendars. We have Glenn Peroza and Tamani Anderson-Powell here today. We'll turn the presentation over to them whenever they're ready.
Thank you. We do have calendars for you today. We have modified year-round and traditional, and we also have our early college calendars. We'll be bringing the early college calendars as a consent item in later board meeting today. We do have less flexibility on the year-round, on the early college calendar, so that's why we're asking that just get approved. But we are bringing the modified year-round and traditional calendars for discussion today. Ms. Tamani Anderson-Powell's here, and she's going to walk you through the different calendars that have come up with the group that we've worked with. There's a calendar committee that she works tirelessly with as we're getting more and more interest groups reaching out for particular days that they'd like to see us acknowledge in the academic calendar. So with that, I'll turn it over to Tamani.
Thank you. So thank you for having me today. The first calendars that I'd like you to take a quick look at are the 24-25 early college calendars. So these are the two instructional calendars that the different early colleges will use next school year. The other ones that I'm bringing up for 25-26. But these two are for 24-25. Typically, staff at the early colleges work with staff at their university or college partner to create a calendar that aligns with that college or university partner. I don't do a lot with these calendars. I just vet that they have all of the things they're supposed to have, and they do. But these calendars are really designed to align with the college or university partner that those schools work with. So you'll see some variation in the two calendars, and that's just because NC State has its own calendar and Wake Tech has its own calendar. And so that's why they're not exactly alike. I will try to answer any questions that you might have, but we would like to have these approved tonight since they begin the next school year.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson-Powell. Board members, you've heard the presentation. You know the calendars are locked in basically dependent upon the university partners that we have. Does anyone have any questions, or are we ready to proceed to the next ones?
Let's go.
Anyone? All right, thank you. We'll move on to the next one.
Thank you. So, do you want to say anything before we start?
No.
About these? Okay, so I'm going to start with the most complicated but easiest one because it's so complicated. So if you'll take a look at the year-round, 25-26 year-round draft. Like all other calendars now, it offers 177 student days. Oh, I'm sorry. There we go. Thank you. It offers 177 student days. You'll find 17 teacher work days, although on this calendar you won't see 17 teacher work days because many of them are during a student's track out. This is a student calendar. Once this is approved, I work with the Office of Compensation to create staff calendars. So on this particular calendar, you can't just count and find 17 teacher work days. But there are 17 teacher work days, 11 holidays, and 10 vacation days. There are 4 school-wide teacher work days, which are indicated in purple. So those are school-wide. November 4th, Election Day, which is a teacher work day on all of the calendars for this particular year. August 15th, which helps year-rounds kind of have at least one whole work day at the beginning of the school year. March 5th, the Elections Board has asked us to look at primary election days every other year. And then June 19th to honor requests from the community for Juneteenth. On this calendar, you'll also see at the end 2 kind of light blue days. Because I don't have that up on the board, but you're looking at the calendar itself, right?
Yes.
There's 2 light blue days at the end. Those are days that we will use for end of grade remediation. I'm not going to say it correctly. End of grade remediation, retesting, and readministration. Thank you. So we reserve those 2 days. We use banked hours to create that opportunity for students in those schools. You'll see on the bottom of this page the schools that currently offer, assign all of their students to Track 4. Those decisions are made in the Office of Choice and Planning about which schools, but currently these are the schools that assign all of their students to Track 4, but they follow the same Track 4 that is on this multi-track calendar. Any questions?
Any questions for Steph? All right.
Okay, so we'll move to the next nicest calendar, which is our modified year-round calendar. On this calendar, all students are assigned to one track, so to speak. Again, 177 student days, 17 teacher work days, 11 holidays, 10 vacation days. Typically, this calendar starts end of July. They have a quarter, and then they have a 2-week fall break, another quarter, 2-week winter break, another quarter, 2-week spring break, and they get out around Memorial Day. So we try to, that's kind of how that calendar works. Again, most of their teacher work days fall during track out, but there are some teacher work days that are included when students are in session. Again, that's November 4th, Election Day, February 16th, which is President's Day, but it's just a nice kind of break in there for students and for teachers. March 3rd, again, that primary election day, and then April 6th, another just kind of little break before they go into that long final stretch. And you'll see at the end of the document the schools that currently operate on this calendar. Any questions about?
Ms. Edmonds?
Not a question, but can you please, for anybody watching in the public, tell us why we can't have more schools on modified calendar?
Unhappily, I will tell you that. That is state law, that only schools that were already on this calendar, and you'll see this note at the bottom of the slide, according to North Carolina calendar law, only the schools that were grandfathered and operating on this calendar in the 2003-2004 school year, or any school with calendar flexibility can request to move to this calendar, but I think that's not always a given. So you'll see a limited number of schools, I think there are 7 that operate on this calendar. Thank you for asking that question.
Thank you.
All right, any further questions about the modified calendar? All right, then, we'll move on.
Okay, so now we'll move to the most exciting calendar. And I want to start with being sure that everybody understands there is a calendar law in North Carolina, and so there are parameters that we have to follow when creating the traditional instructional calendar. You can't start any earlier than the Monday closest to August 26th, and school has to end no later than the Friday closest to June 11th. And so those parameters sometimes limit what this calendar can do. We have to have a minimum of 185 days or 1,025 hours, and in Wake County Schools, we have decided to go with 177 days and 1,025 hours. Again, you'll find 17 teacher work days, 10 vacation days or annual leave days, 11 holidays. I said 177 student days. There are some required days on here. As for all calendars, and I don't think I pointed this out earlier, the holidays that are included in this calendar are those that come from the state personnel holidays. They're already identified in the calendar. And so we don't really have a choice for those days. Those are in blue on the calendar. And then the annual leave days are ones that we have some flexibility with when we place them, but typically we place them around winter break, around spring break, and around the Thanksgiving break when possible.
So before we get into how the committee determined which days that they'd like to recommend to you for teacher work days or for days off or whatnot, Tamani, can you just share with them who comprises of the calendar committee?
Certainly. So it is my joy to serve as the liaison. We have school-based staff from elementary, middle, and high. We have other central staff from testing, compensation, HR, and then we have community members They may be on their school's PTA, but they may just be community members from different organizations that want to come and share their needs or requests with the committee. Typically have 30, 35 people attend back and forth, but I think we have a good makeup of different people in the community.
And we often open every meeting with the committee is that these are instructional calendars. These are meant for student instruction. While there are other interests that ask for particular days off, other holidays that are not recognized by the state, we try to accommodate them as much as possible. But as many of you know, there are more and more groups coming forward requesting days to be included in our calendar. And with the limited amount of time that we have that you'll see on the next slide, it's becoming more and more difficult for staff to accommodate everyone's request. On top of the days that you've already asked us to accommodate, the 2 days for primary election days, and so forth. And so we're just trying to bring calendars to you now that, again, have an instructional focus. So you may hear from other groups that say, hey, our holiday that we were advocating for was not able to be acknowledged. You know, we'd like you to reconsider that calendar. It's just we have too many groups that we can't accommodate them all. So I just wanted to give that information to you up front.
Thank you for that. So you'll see that this calendar begins on Monday, August 25th. There were staff members who asked that it begin on Tuesday, but because of other requests from the calendar and other shifts, we shifted back to Monday, August 25th, which is the first day that traditional calendar can begin under the calendar law. So you'll see there are 4 teacher work days ahead of that first day. Schools really prefer 5, but when we looked at making March 3rd a work day, then I had to do some shifting. One of the things that the board has asked us to do is to try to have a teacher work day, a holiday, a vacation day, or something every month. And so you'll see that this calendar does accomplish that. There's a teacher work day, a holiday, or vacation day in every month to give everybody a little break here and there. And so you have 1 teacher work day in September, you have 2 in October, and then you have 1 on November 4th, which aligns with the end of that quarter. November 11th, and it also aligns with election day, so we kind of did a 2-for-1 on November 4th. And that's kind of what you have to do with this calendar, is massage it a little bit to try to meet several different needs, maybe with 1 teacher work day. This calendar happily does have a 2-week winter break. Take in mind this is the 25-26 calendar before y'all get too excited, but there is a 2-week winter break on this one. Staff really liked having a teacher work day at the end of winter break before students come back. You'll see there's a teacher work day on January 26th, which aligns with the end of the quarter, and another one on February 16th, which again is President's Day and gives you a little break in there. The request for primary election day, March 3rd, and then March 20th is a teacher work day, and then you'll see there's the week break. Spring break is March 30th through April 3rd, and then there's a teacher work day again coming back from that break that teachers really like. There is a teacher work day on May 1st. That's going into testing season, and so schools really like to hold on to May, but did maybe need 1 more little break before they go into that testing season. So you'll see 1 on May 1st. And then the month of May really is about testing. And the last day of school is June 11th. Elementary schools really like having 2 teacher work days at the end of the year. So we've tried to honor a lot of different requests with this calendar. If we do community requests, we try to honor 1 community request if we can. We're not always able to do those, but we certainly seek to try to make those work when we can. But our first responsibility, as Mr. Carosa said, is to create a calendar that supports instruction. I'm happy to answer questions.
Brad, any questions from the board on the calendar recommendation for the traditional calendars?
Just a comment.
Sure, go ahead, Mr. Swanson.
For those that may be listening, I was looking at the board policy because I know we can't accommodate every holiday or religion, but under our policy 4400, which is attendance section D, under excused absences, section 6 states that students may request those days. I'm paraphrasing, I'm not
Yes,
necessarily
yes, yes.
reason, but students can take that opportunity and just provide some documentation.
Sure.
So in case we cannot get to every particular holiday.
And I emailed, I had a conversation with Dr. Chavis about that, because their office in the past has put out a list of holidays so that, to remind teachers to be cognizant of those days, especially if we're not able to accommodate the day off in the calendar. So thank you for mentioning that, but I am working with Dr. Chavis to be sure that that document is shared with schools.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Swanson. You know, that is a good reminder. We do have a lot of folks that'll come to us with a lot of questions about teacher work days, and it's important to remind people, I think, that we have a limited number, right? And oftentimes, some of those are already taken up, as Ms. Anderson-Powell has said, whether it's the, county use of our facilities for Election Day, needing to accommodate that, whether it is giving all of our staff that time at the end of the quarter to make that transition. And so that leaves fewer and fewer choices. So, Ms. Anderson-Powell, if you wanted to say again, I know the committee comes together. How much time totally do you think they put in to developing your draft recommendation?
Well, my committee puts in, the committee meets 3 to 4 hours to create an initial draft. That draft then we take to the superintendent's Teachers Advisory Council for some more feedback. We share it sometimes with the superintendent's leadership team for more feedback, and then if we get other requests from district leadership, we kind of look to see how we can flex the calendar.
Lots of voices
I
and
spend a
lots of
lot of
review.
time listening and trying to accommodate as best we can with keeping instruction at the forefront of what we do for this instructional calendar. And this particular calendar has a little bit more room. There are years where the beginning and the end date are very tight, which further limits the ability to shift and have a lot of teacher work days within the instructional time. So this one might look great, but 26, 27 could look vastly different. So don't shoot me when I bring that one.
Well, thank you so much. I know we all really appreciate all of your hard work on this.
Tamani's done a really good job of inviting everyone that has reached out to you, and you've shared their names with us, inviting them to become part of the committee. So you also try to get them involved that way.
This committee typically meets on a teacher work day. We meet virtually so that if there's staff members that want to join, they can stay at their schools, but they can still join the meeting. So they don't have to come in person, community members as well. So we try to do it on a day that I think more people are available to share.
Thank you so much. All right.
Next steps, we will bring this for board approval at the next board meeting. So not tonight's board meeting, but the meeting after. I think it's the first meeting in April.
So we will see the early college.
Early colleges will be a consent item tonight, and then we will bring this as an action item on the first meeting in April.
All right. Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. We'll move to our next agenda item, payroll frequency information. As you remember, we had a robust conversation about this at a previous board meeting, and we have additional information being presented to us tonight. Let's see. Looks like we have a team of folks. We'll give them a minute just to transition over. All right.
We'll just roll that chair right over here.
All right, so, Ms. Luton, who's driving the presentation? Ms. Posey, you, Mr.
We are
Dooley?
all going to drive, and I'm just going to kick us off. You here, sit here, because I'm going to leave. I can hear you. No. I'm passing off this. So I'm only 2 feet away.
Running from the chair.
All right, so we are here to bring the board requested information on payroll frequency. I'm going to go through our desired outcomes. Sashi, will you flip one slide over? So today we aim to
provide you with information on the employees who are eligible for this initiative, results of the staff survey, the current state and timeline for the Oracle ERP upgrade, and then the costs associated with this initiative. We're going to get started by sharing information from the staff survey. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to Sarah Clark, our Senior Director of Communications.
Great to be here. So I'm excited to be here to bring you all the results of our twice monthly pay survey. We surveyed about 6,400 employees. This is about 32% of our staff. And we really wanted to hear from those employees that are eligible for twice monthly pay. So there is a state law that prevents us from paying our licensed employees and contract employees more than once a month. So we focused on our hourly employees as well as those employees who are paid on salary grades 17 through 30. And our occupational and physical therapists, those employees are paid on their own scale, as you all know. So, sit down, Sashi.
There you go.
I think you're on
You're on it, yeah. And that concludes our presentation.
You're going to get a sneak peek of everything. So, great news with this survey. This is what we call a pulse survey. So it is a shorter survey with just a few questions. We use pulse surveys to gather information and feedback from specific groups of staff on very specific topics. And the great news is we got nearly a 68% response rate from those surveyed. We know this is good because we work with a partner called Qualtrics. Qualtrics does our onboarding and exit surveys, and they assured us that this type of survey, you typically see the first time you do it, a response rate between 30 and 60%. So we surpassed that, and we were super pleased about that. And I think one of the reasons that we were successful in hearing from so many employees is that we collaborated to make sure that these staff had every opportunity possible to take the survey. So it was anonymous. We did not require anyone to sign into Wake ID to take it. They could access it with a QR code. They could take it on their phone. We translated it into Spanish and made that survey, that version of the survey, available for directors and supervisors to share. And then we really worked hand in hand with our supervisors, particularly in transportation and CNS, to ensure that they were encouraging their staff to take the survey and we were emailing them directly. So it was a team effort, and I think as a result of that, we heard a lot of good feedback from a lot of employees in different roles. Next slide. So let's look at the types of employees that we surveyed. So our first group was our hourly paid employees. These are our bus drivers, our bus safety assistants, and our child nutrition services staff. These are assistant managers, cashiers, and our managers. So this group altogether was about a little more than 1,300 staff members. Our next group of staff that we surveyed was the staff that are paid on salary grades 17 through 30. So these, as you can see, there's a lot more job roles here. We have a lot of different job titles in this district. So this is certainly not all of them that fell under this category, but this was about 5,000 employees altogether. So what did we ask? We first asked our employees what their job role was. The reason that while this was an anonymous survey, the reason that we needed to know their roles is, one, because if we were not getting the response rates we needed from a particular group of staff, we wanted to know that so we could do more to address that and hear from those staff. And then we really did want to be able to bring you all the results broken down by job role. So question number 2 is the big one. What pay frequency do you prefer? Once a month or twice a month? And one thing that we wanted to be sure when we asked this question is that the employees that we surveyed understood what that would look like. So we worked closely with Trish and included specific examples of what twice a month pay would look like for someone who is hourly and what twice a month pay could look like for someone who is salaried. So this means that it is possible for an hourly employee to see paychecks in different amounts. One would reflect the hours that they worked the first time period of the month. If the second time period of the month was different, that could in fact be a paycheck in a different amount. And we wanted to make sure our staff understood that as they were answering this survey. So the next group of questions really gets more at those who indicated they wanted twice per month pay. Why was that their preference? So we asked them some questions that really we're trying to gauge why that would help them, so we can understand the results and the preferences a little bit more. And then, of course, we wanted to give all staff who took the survey the opportunity to share any additional feedback with us. So the last question was an open-ended question for them to share their thoughts about pay frequency. So what did we learn? We learned that overall, among the 4,300 or so staff that responded to us, 62% preferred twice a month pay option, and 38% preferred to keep it as is at once a month. So this is overall among all responses. There's a couple different ways we can break this down. So the first chart shows you what the breakdown looked like for our hourly staff. And you'll see that for our hourly paid employees, our bus drivers, our safety assistants, our CNS employees, that breakdown was 70% preferring twice a month and 30% preferring to stay as is at once a month. And then the yellow and orange chart shows the employees not in that role. So the 5,000 remaining staff, you'll see that breakdown was 60-40. So we've got another way to look at numbers, and this slide shows you the breakdown between transportation versus CNS, and it reflects the response rates. Transportation, our bus drivers and our safety assistants, we were so excited that we heard from 80% of them, and again, you can see that 70-30 split there for that employee group. And then among our CNS staff, we heard from 60% of them, so a little bit lower, but again, you see that 70-30 breakdown for those categories. So this slide walks you through some of the other larger groups of staff that we heard from. We know we have a lot of IAs, so that was certainly a significant group that we heard from. And their responses, about 66% of them preferred twice a month. School-based office staff, our bookkeepers, our lead secretaries, our registrars, those were another large group we heard from, and we heard from a lot of them as well. That was one of our higher response rates at 80%, and 62% of those staff preferred twice a month pay. Our custodians, we would have liked our response rate there to be a little bit higher, but we did work with our custodial services supervisors, and we're already thinking about ways that we can hear from more of those staff next time we do a survey. But for their breakdown, they were at 61% preferring twice a month pay. Our OTs and PTs wanted to tell us something loud and clear. So we heard from 88% of the staff in those roles, And they want to stay, 95% of them want to stay at the once per month pay frequency. So we want to be sure that our OTs and PTs who are listening know that we heard them loud and clear. And then the last row is the staff in other job role categories. So those are, that staff not mentioned above earlier in the chart. That's a lot of our central office staff that are paid on grades, and that split was looking 50-50. So these next three questions really tried to get at the reasoning for preferring twice a month pay. We only asked these next three questions of those who indicated they had a twice a month preference. And you can see that they are strongly aligned around the feeling that twice a month pay will help them better budget, better manage their finances. The next chart. They also feel that twice a month pay will increase their job satisfaction. And then twice a month pay, they felt they were in agreement that twice a month pay would increase the likelihood that they stay with us working in our district. So next steps, our survey results are somewhat hot off the presses. We just closed this survey last Thursday, and we worked a lot with our valuable partners in tech services to count the results and break this down and provide you an analysis. But we have not yet finished going through all the open responses, and there's more than 1,200 open-ended responses. So we plan to review those, redact those if needed, sort them into themes, and we will be providing all of that to you all, hopefully by the end of this week. And then, of course, if you need an additional breakdown or want to see the results in a different way, we're happy to put that together for you. And then we are so grateful that our staff took the time to share with us their feedback on this. And we knew that when we started, we were going to be transparent with the results. If you take time to fill out a survey, you want to know what people said, right? So we are going to be sharing the results of this survey in our all staff messages with all staff tomorrow, as well as if the board takes any action or makes any decisions this evening, we will be sharing that as well.
All right, thank you, Ms. Clark. Are there questions for Ms. Clark about the survey? Ms. Edmonds?
I just want to know, is it possible, if we move forward, that we can do a hybrid where some, for example, the OT and PT won't have to move over? I mean, we can pick and choose which.
So we had some discussions about this with chiefs and leadership. The reason why we looked at anyone who was eligible, particularly in our grades and in the hourly, it does get complicated with some of the programming and being able to manage it and know if it's a specific assignment but it's in a grade. That makes it difficult for us to validate and make sure that reporting and compliance is happening appropriately. And so, Sasha, if you want to add on the technical side, the complexity there.
Yeah, I think the technical side, to be honest, I think it's doable. You can definitely identify, because it's in a different grade, right? So you can definitely identify that. My concern is more on the operational effort, right? Because they will be a part of the monthly payroll. But again, the whole auditing, the checks and balances which needs to happen, that's where the heavy lift comes from. From the technical angle, you can definitely configure the system because they're in the different grade. You can do that. So my, answer would be more. The effort is more on the operational effort.
Okay. Because I'm also concerned about the 50-50 split, not just the OT and PTs. Anyway, that was my only question.
All right, thank you, Ms. Edmonds. Mr. Hershey?
Since you asked people why they selected yes, was there any any reason not to ask people why they said once a month?
I think that gets to the point of the questions, simplifying the questions,
Yep.
as she mentioned with Qualtrics, and using sort of their profile of how they do questionnaires and getting more responses back.
Right, but they would have answered the first question, and then once they answered
Yeah.
twice a month, they...
I think that's good feedback. We didn't contemplate needing that information, but we can certainly think about it for next time and making sure that maybe having the board review the survey before we execute it.
No, I think it's...
There was no rhyme and reason to it. We just
Yeah.
tried to pose questions that we thought would get at the best source of information.
Yeah, ultimately, we felt that if they said no, then they were satisfied with what they had.
Yeah.
Really no reason to give any other feedback, but
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Did we think about giving a no preference also, or at any point? And that maybe like the last 30% who didn't respond? Because I talked to a couple people that were just like, I don't care, so I didn't answer.
Yeah, we
I think-
did not consider a no preference.
That's fine.
I will say, I've started to review the open-ended responses, and I think there's going to be some good stuff that comes out of there.
Great.
Folks did go ahead and share, like those that did not want to move, like,
Oh,
don't
good,
touch
good.
my stuff, so.
Yeah, yeah. All right, great, thank you so much for that.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hershey. Any other questions or comments about the survey? Ms. Caulfield?
I just want to say I appreciate that you evaluated it in different ways to kind of get different perspectives, to break it down. I think it's what Mr. Hershey is referring to is just like, not that it's, this is how we learn by doing this, right? But I think just having both answers and both perspectives just kind of keeps us narrowing down what's the best option that we can fit everything in. But I think it's great that you broke it down in different ways so we could see how many people and percentages, because you can see where the percentages are on one of these charts, and I scrolled off of it, where it was 76 out of 86, says 88%. And although it's almost all of them, so that category does count, it's very different from looking at one of the others where it's 1790, where the respondents, at a 2000. So it's like it's a big difference. So seeing those specific numbers with your specific questions breaks it down for us to understand more. So thank you.
Thank you. We included those additional breakdowns that were in Assembly, the breakdowns by job role, count by job role. So that would give you a little bit more on that 50-50 split, like who likely is in that and what's comprising of that.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ms. Caulfield. Well, if there are no other questions, let's talk about Oracle.
All right, I'll kick it off. Thank you, Sarah. Right. All right, we'll spend a little bit of time talking about Oracle. We'll talk a little bit of history about Oracle, the current landscape, and what are the different options for the implementations. And I think there's a lot in the options we have provided, but we are more than happy to answer any questions as we go through. So with that said, let's start with the definition of what an ERP is. ERP stands for the Enterprise Resource Planning. Typically in any organization, the ERP system is considered the lifeblood for the business operations, because that's where your financial reporting happens, that's where your payroll runs take place, your HR, your benefits, your time and attendance, and your GL, general ledger, accounts payable, accounts receivable, a whole lot of functions which happen in those business systems. So it's critical business operations. So we use Oracle ERP. We implemented that in 2000, so it's about 24 years. So do you tag that as legacy? I guess so. It is an old system. Let's talk about the reality, right? The current version of Oracle we currently use is 12.1. Our Oracle vendor does not support 12.1 as a standard support, right? Almost 3 years back, the vendor ended the support on that. What we currently do is we pay extra to get that extended support, right? This is on top of the regular support what we pay them, so we pay a little bit extra to make sure we get that extended support. Now, why do we need extended support? If something happens to our payroll system, something happens to our HR system, it crashes, right? So we can reach out to this vendor and get the required support, right? But the extended support is very constrained with what it can provide, right? Because they're not investing a whole lot of time and effort on an older version of software, right? So Oracle ERP, obviously, is a 24-year-old system. There's a lot of customizations. So what are customizations? Customizations are when you implement a system, you get a lot of functionality out of the box, right? So when you take that functionality and modify it and tailor-make it for your needs, that is a customization, right? So like the payroll frequency we are doing, right? So you can do certain things, but again, you have to do certain things on top of what Oracle provides. So those are all customizations. So big question, do we need to upgrade the Oracle system to do the payroll frequency? No, it's not required, right? You can absolutely configure your payroll frequency in the existing system. But let's talk about it, right? If you don't do your system upgrade, you're just kicking the can down the road, right? As I said, you're going to continue to pay higher maintenance costs. Obviously, you have to pay the vendor for those extra, money you're paying every year. As you delay the upgrades, obviously, it's going to be much more difficult to upgrade because, when you have an older version of iPhone and you're trying to upgrade, it's going to be difficult. So you got to keep up with those updates. So it's kind of a little bit difficult there, and it's going to impact your performance and efficiency as the systems are old, right? Now, when you talk about Oracle ERP, there are other pieces of software which are around ERP, your taxation software, your operating system. There's a whole lot of other software. So what happens is these vendors will not support the older version of Oracle, which means if something happens, you got to literally work with them to get the support needed. So that may even, in fact, impact your payrolls. So sometimes, your payroll could be down and you have to work with different vendors to get the support. But just because it's an older version of Oracle, the support what you're going to get is very limited. So that may impact the payroll delays and all that stuff. Obviously, when you're working on a 24-year-old system, it's an old system, obviously it is not aligned with your growing business needs, right? So let's jump into any questions so far. I just want to pause for a second. I just wanted to begin with. There's a lot to cover.
Thank you, Mr. Bedell. I know that we're just at the beginning of the Oracle presentation. I don't want to go too far, but can you give us a little bit of a very brief history on why we use Oracle? Was it something required or mandated or recommended by the State Board, by Board of Education or Department of Public Instruction? As technology has evolved over the last 20 years with more services moving to cloud-based applications, is that something we would look at rather than, we've heard about servers mentioned from time to time. Is there any freedom to outsource this to many of the payroll services that work in the private sector and other parts of the public sector? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I think the history why Wake County chose Oracle way back in 2000, probably I can't answer that question, but I can definitely answer the question about there is a focused approach right now with the DPI. There are a number of school districts, large and big, which are actually implementing ERP. The Oracle Cloud is the new ERP where we need to move. That's the flavor of ERP. DPI is actually suggesting for big school districts like Guilford and Charlotte. So Guilford is actually in the process of implementing. I just had a conversation with them yesterday. They're having some, navigation, but again, they are implementing it. Charlotte, I know they will be going live 2027 of Jan with the whole implementation of Oracle Cloud. Now, our position on that is we want to basically wait a little bit, learn from what happens in Guilford, what happens in Charlotte, because this will be a huge implementation. There's a lot of lessons learned, right? So let them take that first path, and then we can learn from them and then start. Because once we move from 12.1 to 12.2, the new version of Oracle, we are good until 2030. So we're going to have a much more stable system. We can operate it while we learn from what happens in Guilford and what happens in Charlotte and see how we can do our implementation better.
Okay.
So, Mr. Chair, I might have David or either Trish give some information on the history of that, but what I can tell you is that a lot of this has to deal with interfaces that you also have to do with DPI. That's part of what we have to consider. And for whatever reason, changes in financial software at school districts is extremely difficult. And so when you think about a district as large as Wake County, making that change can be difficult. As we understand it, I think Charlotte, that change may not be until 2027. And so once you have a system that you're accustomed to, that's where there's the reluctancy to change. I attempted to do it in a small district for an entire year, and we decided to go back with what we had. And so a lot of that has to do with the flexibility that districts have, but it is about changing that software and how difficult that can be. But Trish or David?
I would just add that Charlotte began work in earnest, including hiring a full-time, I don't know if they actually hired him, but they got an executive from Bank of America who was expert in migrating ERP systems to come on board full-time pre-pandemic. And their target date to go live is 2027, to give you a sense of the scope.
And to answer your question for Oracle, I was actually here when Oracle came on. So the state is still operating on a very old system, the system that we migrated from. It was an MSA system. And the state said, we're moving to Oracle. So everyone needs to move to Oracle. So we got on board and we moved to Oracle. Well, then the state funding did not come through, so the state never went to Oracle. So we've been on Oracle since 2000. We did a phase. Our general ledger came across, our purchasing, budget, all of financial. That was in 2000. And then in 2001, we brought on the HR system along with payroll. So we do have things that other districts do not have. Oracle does work for our reporting requirements. UERS is one of our reporting requirements. We also align with BAS reporting that covers our federal programs. So we are able to use Oracle and the functionality in maintaining our reporting requirements with the state. Going to this new version, primarily because of the supports, we do need to get to that new version, and that would then get us to being in a place where we can go in the future to the cloud. But we do want to see what our neighboring large districts are doing because of the complexities. We have a lot of calendars, as you've seen. All of that requires programming. And so there's calendars for all of these different pays that our staff receive, and that's a huge complexity in programming. So those are the things that we want to make sure work.
Thank you.
So our employees get paid.
All right, and then just the last question, I guess, on that, and then there's some other board members that have a few questions before we continue, was just, with all the functionalities that Oracle has, and I might be using the wrong term, but I assume there's like different modules or stages, things you use for different functions. Can any of those be transitioned, or can any of those be replaced? For example, could you use a payroll service for processing, but then still use Oracle for all of your reporting? What, or are we just locked in, everything has to use an Oracle module?
No, you can do that. You can have an independent system for your payroll. It could be somebody like ADP, any other system, right? But the challenge would be the integration, right? So you can have ADP or any other third-party vendor run the payroll, but how do you get that information back into your core HR system, right? So the reconciliation, that whole integration is going to be a nightmare. That is the reason why you want to keep all your core functions within one singular database, right? Whether it is payroll, whether it is HR, whether it is GL, AR, AP, everything is in one database, so reporting becomes much more seamless.
Thank you. That's a very helpful explanation. Ms. Edmonds, you had a question?
Just, you lost me when you said that we would have 6 years. So we're operating in a 20-year-old system, and then you said something about we would be good if, once we do something, we'd be good for 6 years.
So so the version of Oracle we are currently operating is 12.1. So if you upgrade your Oracle system, you move from 12.1 to 12.2. What that does is the vendor is currently supporting until 2030.
Okay.
Right? So you don't have to pay that extra money, what you're paying every year, so you're good. So what it does is it provides you that runway to really learn from what is happening with Guilford and Charlotte and really plan out well.
So the major overhaul is not a 6-year.
This is, definitely
Okay.
not, correct. This is just a version upgrade from 12.1 to 12.2.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Are there further questions? Okay, Dr. Ng?
Thank you. This may not even be a question that can be answered in this venue, but cybersecurity aspect of this, is there a market improvement in this upgrade, or is that independent, or is something outside of this software?
So to answer your question at a high level, yes, when you go to the new version of software, there's a lot of checks and balances which actually safeguard the system too. Absolutely.
Thank you. Ms. Caulfield and then Ms. Rice?
You mentioned that we had to pay extra for the support because we are a little outdated.
That's
so
right.
How much do we pay for that?
It's over $200K per year, and this is year number 3.
Okay. And if we were to upgrade at 12.2, what's the cost on that?
That's your regular support, what you pay for all your modules.
Okay, so we don't pay extra for that.
You don't have to pay that extra 200.
Okay.
But what you pay your regular yearly support, what you pay Oracle.
So what would stop us from just doing the upgrade? Is that a whole lot of transition that goes just even
Yeah,
upgrading?
and we're going to talk about that schedule and everything. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it's not like moving to the cloud, it's still a big transition.
Yeah, it is a
just upgrade.
transition, but upgrading from your current version to the latest version.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ms. Rice, a question?
Yeah, I thank you guys for the hard work you've done. I don't know if I'm sounding redundant, but I just wanted to ask, because I hear you're saying how challenging this is, make sure I ask this right. What other research did you do around other large districts that are like ours? Because I know I hear us talking about what we're doing within our own state, and we hear another district is leading, and they're actually not the largest district in the state that's trying to lead that narrative. What other schools or what other districts did you all research or connect with to determine what they might be doing and what systems of all the complexities that you talked about, calendar years and types of schools? What other large districts did you connect with that to compare with Wake, to look at how we might transition to people on that large scale that we actually have to compare to? I hear us talk about that a lot of times, how Wake has to we have to look outside of our state because we are the largest. And I know a lot of times you have to do that to make the comparisons. So I was curious to how you all looked at other districts.
So I reached out to the large district consortium. There are approximately 21 districts in that consortium. Cumberland County, Charlotte, Meck, and Wake County are the 3 districts in the state. So you know the limitations that we have. And Cumberland is responded to say that they're looking at outsourcing for substitutes, but they have the same restraints that we have. And so I had about 10 of those districts just reply. 3 of those do monthly payments outside the state. That's Beaverton School District in Oregon, Bellevue in Washington State, and then obviously Cumberland County. But there were 7 districts outside the state that do some form of biweekly pay. Many said that they had been doing it for years, so most of that is a byproduct of what their state has allowed them to do, systems they've had in place forever. And so many just never saw it as an issue for them. It's just been a part of their environment. So we do know that we have the legislative limitation, but that's kind of what you have in terms of how other states do it. They may have different kinds of financial softwares, but ultimately, if it's something that they've been doing for a while, and many have been doing it, for 30, 40 years, part of the structure that they've already had in place, and they haven't seen any reason to change that.
So are you saying that they're using, like we are, the same software?
No,
for the
I'm
past?
not
Yeah,
sure.
I'm referring to our software, not necessarily the change in biweekly pay, but I'm referencing, since I'm trying to grasp the understanding before we come to a consensus around the software, because we're talking about software, we're paying extra money for software that's outdated to get to a place where we need to be, so that we're not paying extra funding that could go somewhere else. And so that's why I'm asking, is the software we're using working, or a different type of software we're using working better in a larger school district that you just explained, just they've been using it and it's working, and they have some of the same complexities that we're having, minus the legislative piece. Did we ever consider that? That's what.
Yeah, let me try to answer that. So I come from another school district.
Okay.
Right. I've implemented Oracle. There I was, the whole implementation, and we paid all our employees bi-weekly.
Okay.
Right. This is way back in 2003 when we implemented it. So did I see any issue? No. The issues, there's complexities, and again, that school district was a union-based and was way more complicated, right? Okay. So that's first part. The second part of the question is, there are a lot of school districts across the United States. We use Oracle, because Oracle is like a gold standard,
okay.
Right? Because that is the reason why, if you look at DPI, for large school districts, right, it is saying you got to go with Oracle Cloud. For the medium scale and the smaller scale, there are other versions of ERP. I think it's Tyler, and there's another one. So they know, for large school district, because of the complexities, because of all the things involved, they know a software like Oracle can handle it. Now, because this is a 24-year-old system, but if you go to cloud, hopefully it can address a lot of these lingering issues.
So you really answered it. Oracle is the gold standard of what we need. So the programming we have really is the best within large districts across the nation. However, we're asking questions then around, so why are we even asking questions around how to upgrade or when to upgrade, other than doing what's necessary to make everything better? We have someone leading it that's done it in other districts, bi-weekly pay and all of that, so it works. I'm sorry, maybe I'm asking the wrong question.
It's a legitimate question, but the reason that we're asking questions are that there are other employers in the public and private sector, and they use different tools. Others use Oracle, but only use Oracle for certain functions.
Gotcha.
So while they might use Oracle, say to track employee benefits or time or things like that, they may still use a company like an ADP to actual process. Mm-hmm. And it's getting down into those finer points, not just is there a replacement for Oracle. We might still need Oracle if North Carolina's Department of Public Instruction says we have to report data in Oracle. But some school districts around the country may not use Oracle for all of these functions and might actually use other vendors or other providers, and that's sort of what we were getting at.
Okay, thank you. But Tashi says
And so we'll
it
have,
works
we'll have
bi-weekly.
common report.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm
Yeah,
just making sure.
So we'll have common reporting requirements as a government entity, and both public and private have those. We're going to have something that's going to be vastly different than a private business that does their own thing. And then also every state has different requirements. And so the reason that most districts are slow to move with changing software is because of the complexity of that. And so what we've seen personally are school districts that have made that switch. It did not turn out the way they wanted it. And I can tell you, a good friend of mine is no longer the superintendent because of that, and it's a very complicated process. And when we look at what can happen when financial systems don't
That's
come
what we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, I get it. No, I get it.
So what we're sharing with you are the things that we will need to do in order to lift this up. And so our intention is to lift it up, but we want to make sure we check every box and everything. And so that was one of the comments that I was going to have, is that looking at the potential delays and errors and problems, we want to make sure we do everything to get as much of that answered and resolved, so that when we do hit the go button, we can do what we need to do.
So it's more implementation than it is cost and actually doing it.
But I'm confident in what I'm hearing, that we have it. We're going to do great.
Yeah, I think so. Now we just want to get to the options and how long it takes.
Yeah, I was looking, I read those options, yeah.
I do want to add one thing about when it comes to payroll and payroll reporting. So the Uniform Education Reporting System, where we report all of our data, that includes things where the salary codes and vouchers of where we pay our employees is reported to the state. So that is a legal requirement that we have. We not only report all of our payables expenditures and checks and vouchers and account codes, we also report all of our employee payments by voucher. It has their budget code, which ties to their licenses. So it would be difficult to have an outside system doing our payroll when our legal requirements to report that information for employees, their licenses, their earnings, and all of those records, as well as the information that flows through the retirement, where we have to capture retirement reporting as well.
Thank
So
you.
all of those things would be, yes.
Very helpful, very good information. All right, Mr. Badella, if you'd like to continue, please.
All right, moving on, let's look at some options here for implementation. Jeff?
Good afternoon. Jeff Alford, Senior Director in Technology Services. I'm going to walk through the options at a high level, just the milestone events that take place within the timelines. So the first activity, Oracle ERP, as we've been discussing, upgrading to 12.2 and other systems, the actual hardware and the operating system as well, would go live January 1, 2025. Then we would go in a stabilized state. Stabilization would take place. Now this is to ensure a smooth transition. It's promoting user adoption, resolving issues promptly, and optimizing the system. That period of time would be from January 1 to April. Then your first change in payroll frequency, phase 1. Now this group includes the hourly paid employees. Development would start and the configurational work will start in March, and the first pay increase would occur in July. Now it says July 1st, but the first pay release, the check would be mid-month, and then the second one would be end of month. The phase 2, this group includes the eligible salary employees. Development and configurational work will start in June of 25. And we would go live, increasing the pay for these folks, January 1 of 2026. That's option A.
Right. Some of the things to consider why we look at option A is the Oracle upgrade. I think we have spoken enough about it because it's a pretty complicated upgrade and everything. We want to make sure everything is tested properly. There's a, it's very important for the smooth transition to the new version. We spoke about customization, so a lot of these customizations do break when we upgrade, which means we have to validate it, we have to fix it, and make sure they're working the way it should work, right? Obviously, when we are doing this process, there is year-end, year-begin process which happens, which is getting ready for your W-2s, the 1099s we need to process, and all that work is happening, right? Obviously, we spoke about the post-upgrade stabilization, so when you do a major upgrade, irrespective of how much of testing you do, validation you do, you're going to have some surprises, right? So you're going to identify those issues and address those. I think Jan, we are looking at moving to a new benefits vendor, so it does require that testing, making sure everything is good there. Obviously, system testing has to be done by the cross-functional team, which is the teams from the compensation services, HR, everybody. While they're also working on their regular day-to-day job because they still have to do that. And so I just want to call that out.
All right, let's walk through option B. So the one constant in all the options is we upgrade to 12.2 and go live January 1. With this option, the change in payroll frequency for the hourly paid employees the actual configuration would start in August of 24, and we would go live in January. And same as the July model, it would be mid-January for the first pay release, and then the end of January for the second. Then we go through stabilizing the system for phase 2. That would be from January 1 to April. And then we would bring in phase 2 folks, the eligible salaried employees, and the pay increase frequency would start July 1st of 25.
So one of the things to consider for option B, basically, when we do the 12.2 upgrade, you're also doing the payroll frequencies along with 12.2, right? So while everybody is testing, they're testing for the whole thing, meaning they're testing for 12.2, they're also testing for the payroll frequencies, so everything is getting tested, right? What it does is, because you are introducing 2 changes at the same time, so obviously if something breaks, why did it break? Did the 12.2 break or the payroll frequency break? So there will be a little bit of navigation we need to look at. Obviously, impact on stability because you're introducing 2 changes. User adoption, obviously with a new version of Oracle, the screens do change. There's a little bit of navigation difference. So there is the adoption thing we need to also focus on. But also, when you're trying to pay employees twice every month, meaning the time has to be collected much more frequently, right? So you're not waiting until the end of the month, but you're asking them to enter probably every 2 weeks. So that's a change. So we need to keep in mind that whole change management, I guess, is what we're talking about here. Right.
Okay, option C, we would upgrade to 12.2, January 1 of 25. We would go through the stabilization. That period in option C would be from January 1 to March 30 of 25. And then our first phase of hourly employees would go live with the pay increase frequency of April 1st, so mid-April, end of April. And then the second phase, folks, the salaried employees, would go live November 1st.
So on option C, obviously, there's not a, I would say, a long runway. You go live with 12.2 Jan 1, but literally you need to turn back and start configuring the payroll frequency and everything. So the runway is very short. Obviously, you have your team doing the 12.2 testing and everything, right? And we go live, you're asking them to go back and retest everything on the payroll frequency. There is a testing fatigue and everything. So to summarize everything, option A, to make kind of things a little simple so that, option A is the low risk because you have enough time to do everything. Because you do 12.2, then literally you have a lot of time for stabilization. Then you do the payroll frequency, you test everything, and then you go live, and then you do a bigger group. So that is low risk. The second option, which is option B, is a medium risk, right? The reason why it is medium is because you're introducing both 12.2 and payroll frequency together. But the best part of it is the end users, the testers, are actually testing for the whole thing, right? By doing that, you're gaining about 6 months ahead. You're actually are able to go live with the payroll frequency, at least for the hourly employees. That's option B. Option C, again, I'm going to wear my technical hat. I would say that's the riskiest one because there's not a whole lot of runway there. Because you go live with 12.2, and then immediately you're working on payroll frequency, and if things don't happen the way, there's not a whole lot of runway. So I just want to kind of throw that out so that you have understanding about all the 3 options, right? Again, if there's any questions, happy to answer. But Dr. Taylor, you want to pitch in?
I think you covered it.
All right, thank you, Mr. Burdella. So the very next slide does ask for questions. There it is. So if you have questions about this part of the portion, the IT portion and the questions related to Oracle, it'd be appropriate. Mr. Hershey?
So obviously A is, I can read between the lines, it's preferred. My question, though, is the change in payroll frequency, Phase 1 and Phase 2, if we go with A, why the 6 months between Phase 1 and Phase 2? Could Phase 2 be moved up potentially? So you keep the Oracle upgrade, the stabilization as you want it in A, we roll with the first payroll frequency on July 1st. The question is, why would we have to go all the way to January 1st for Phase 2?
For the larger group, correct? Is that what you're talking about, Mr. Hershey?
Say that again?
So for option A,
Yeah.
July 1, we're going
Why
to
is
the-
Phase 2 so far away from Phase 1 and
Right. I think the reasoning there is because you are actually working in a larger group of employees. You want to make sure all those things are set up and tested the right way. Irrespective of where you see that option for Phase 2, you're going to see that 6 months, right? Because it's a larger group and there's not a whole lot of wiggle room for failure. You want to make sure, because when you talk about hourly employees, it's a smaller group. It's about 6% of the population, right?
Okay.
This is a much larger group, way more complicated because there's so many different types of employees and everything. We want to make sure it's tested right because the population is more. We want to get more time to test it. That was the reason.
Thank you, Mr. Hershey. Ms. Caulfield and Mr. Swanson?
I just was wondering, are we, just to reiterate, kind of pulling what we were talking about before and now, we're definitely going to try and go to cloud in the long run, is that correct? So some of these options, they don't actually go live until 2026. And it sounds like if we're going to go to iCloud, we're kind of just stretching out a lot of change that goes along the way. Although some of it's required, it seems like option B is kind of like in the middle of the two. But in option A, where it does give you that time to kind of have a smooth transition, it seems like you might go all the way to 2026 and now you're going to be adjusting for the new. You see what I'm saying? It's almost like it's going to be continuous effort for you.
Yeah, I would say the cloud implementation of Oracle will probably happen post 2027. What we get to know from, we may start some work, but actual work and the whole planning, if we go that direction, will happen 2027 and beyond.
So could you clarify that 12.2 is not going to the cloud? Because I think that's the question.
Yeah, 12.2 is not, yeah.
So
So the version of software, what you're talking about, the 12.2 is not a cloud version. That's the version of software which is on-prem.
Yeah, no, I think I understood that, actually. Thank you for clarifying that. I think I was saying that you're going to constantly be in transition. If we're making this option, is that in the time being, we're going to do this to accommodate what we need, and we're dragging that to 2026. We're then going to turn around in 2027 and start implementing again.
Yeah.
So
I think irrespective of what we do, I think probably we're going to get that 6 months, 1 year kind of break, but you are on that turn again because even if you go with any of the options, right, within about one year, 1.5 years, you need to start planning to go to the cloud.
And my second part of my question is this going to determine whether we can implement this pay change for the teachers if we decide to do that? I mean, not the teachers, sorry. The salaried and those employees. Will that affect it?
No, and so all three recommendations will have hourly employees being phased in at one time and the remaining employees being phased in at the other time that are eligible. And so there's, depending on the option, there's a window of time between one versus the other, but it would be a recommendation for all employees that qualify to be paid twice per month.
Okay. So this implementation, whichever option, is going to determine when they
Yes,
see that.
it's just a difference in time when it would happen. So very good question.
All right, thank you, Mr. Swanson, and then Dr. Ng.
Thank you. So my question is around the upgrade. So it sounds like the upgrades are very significant. Why are we waiting until 25 to do those upgrades instead of moving on those upgrades much quicker?
In fact, we are not even waiting. We already started working on that upgrade because the board has given us a new hardware. We are already configured the hardware. The team is full speed into the implementation. Just because of all the customizations we have and all the complexities we have, it does take that kind of runway to get us to a smooth 12.2, right? Just to add to that, if you look at option B, we suggested, if you add on the payroll frequency on top of the 12.2 upgrade, when the testing happens, you can test the whole thing. But just going back to your question, it does take that kind of runway to really do a thorough testing to make sure everything is operating the way it should operate.
Go ahead.
So that works, because I felt, and I understand the risk of all of them, but for me, option B and option C is where I'm kind of in between. And the reason why I'm leaning that option is because if it was specified or it was a question in the survey that said this would take place in a certain time frame, or 25 or 26, I would have felt a little bit more comfortable with A. But because it wasn't specified in the survey, and if someone's, we've had the respondents, and I feel that, with this big change, of course it's going to take time, but folks may be looking for those checks that happen immediately. And we're talking an additional 2 years from now with option A. So that is why I'm kind of,
Your slide is, your question is 13. It said 46%. If you go back to 13, it talks.
And so
46% said that it would increase the likelihood of them staying. So that's a significant amount. It's adding to what you're saying.
And so what I would add to that is that we wanted to be sure not to pose a question to employees to say, when would you like this to happen? And so if that were to happen, then it would put both administration and the board in a position to where we might make a decision much sooner than, what technology and changes in software would allow us to do. And so we didn't want to put anybody in that position, but just be transparent on what it would take, but that we will make it happen. And I'll be making a recommendation, but the board can certainly go in any direction that they like.
Mr. Swanson, did you have more?
I'm fine. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there other comments, Dr. Ng, and then we'll do Ms. Rice and then Vice Chair Johnson-Hostel.
I look at this as a kind of weighing the balance between urgency and accuracy, right? Because I certainly don't want to make the mistake of not being accurate. But at the same time, I want to be, understanding of some of our employees, feeling the urgency of doing something about it. I guess one of the questions is, is it better to do this concurrent upgrade and customization, the payroll frequency thing at the same time? Does that provide you more accuracy versus in option A, where you're doing all this customization, and then you're going to have to end up doing some more, finagling once you start implementing the frequency changes. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, is there one that's better than the other in terms of the...
Dr. Wing, I'm a technical guy. I can give my 2 cents, but right. Again, given an option, I would probably go with option B, right? Because it is the balance between, speed and accuracy, what you just said, right? Because it does give that wiggle room, I would say, to really it allows us to do something, but also it allows us to go to 12.2, and you're taking care of that. Then you're worrying about the bigger population, right, later down the road. So that's the reason why I said when I spoke about the risk, that's how we categorize. Because if you go with option A, I'm just giving you information, right? It is pretty much dragged out until 2026, right?
Thank you, Dr. Ng. It sounds like maybe that...
My question, that was our
Answered by
question.
his.
Ask the expert when it comes to this, right? Our thoughts are nice, but we don't do this.
Okay, great. Well, if there are no other questions, Ms. Rilla, thank you very much.
All right.
Can you clarify something? Is he B?
So he had, I believe Mr. Padula said if you were asking him, his recommendation would be for B.
Okay.
I believe you also heard Dr. Taylor said that he would be bringing a recommendation.
Okay, all
And he
right.
did not tip his hand as to what that recommendation was yet.
Thank you.
It will be forthcoming.
All right, thank you. Ms. Posey?
All right. So looking at the twice monthly pay cost model, so we had some estimates initially that were brought to the board. And we've gone back and looked at the numbers, and we've got some one-time implementation cost. The $85,000 is around the programming that Sashi shared with you. And then contractors for testing, this is really supporting 9 areas across the various departments with that testing support. And then our interfaces with third-party benefit providers, this is to be determined. Right now in my discussions with staff, it may not be a cost, but it also may be a cost. So we want you to be aware of that. Until the board makes a decision, we cannot really work with our vendors to say, hey, what will this look like when we start transmitting files twice a month? Or is there a way for us to actually receive the information but then only transmit it monthly? So those are things that as soon as we know the direction of the board, that we can dig into that with our respective providers. And then as we look at costs for supporting the additional work in our transportation and child nutrition services, so you heard about now they're having to collect timesheets and key twice a month. So that requires the review and accuracy of the timesheets, making corrections, keying the pay into the system. And so that would require 2 FTE, which is full-time employment. In human resources, there will be the likelihood of the system being locked out longer. So right now, the payroll lockout dates limit payroll to keying information into their system only 10 days. So out of 21 days, they only have 10 days they can key in new hire information, changes to the system. So we're going to have longer lockout periods. So we're looking at having positions to help support the hiring request and getting those entries done into the system. In compensation services, we're going to have changes that affect both benefits and our payroll. So related research and audits, increased management. So you are taking a good portion of the population and you are now paying them twice a month. So there potentially are going to be errors in the payroll that we need to audit monthly and make sure we capture those errors and make those corrections as needed. And so right now, our overall cost is around $495,000. And there's potential for additional FTE beyond this as we determine this post-implementation, but these are our best estimates currently, and that does include all of the associated benefits for the full-time employment. And that's mine. Do you have any questions?
So, Ms. Posey, thank you for that, and thank you for the brevity. Very efficient. I also wanted to thank you again because you had answered one of my big questions with just one clear sentence earlier, so I really appreciated that. When this information was first presented, and we heard, over $200,000 in software redesign, I think maybe up to 8 full-time employees added, there was a lot of reaction from people in the public kind of watching and hearing about it. And it does seem, without that explanation at least, a little extreme in terms of our processes and modern, how modern they are. Could you talk, do you see the potential for modernization of these practices? When the reconciliation alone, is there, any efficiencies to be gained for more automation, or what could we do to improve our processes forward in terms of this record keeping? I know accuracy is the gold standard. We want to preserve that, but it seems like a lot of actual people for a process that a lot of organizations seem to be moving away from.
Well, Absolutely. So, I mean, in general, we've only got 11 staff members that do payroll for 20,000 plus employees. We have everything from licensure requirements, so when they get entered in the system, there's validation on that side of the house with HR, and I don't see HA in here. And so at times, we're going to have salary audits. We're going to have employees who change their benefits. So you have a life change, that changes happen, so changes happen in the system as well. You have principals who move people from assignments, and those PAFs, we call them personal action forms, changes are made, those changes flow across the system. You have people leaving an assignment, and so when you leave a position assignment, maybe you go from a graded position to an administrator position. We've now got the old assignment that we have to do certain payouts of comp time leave on, and then they transition to the new assignment. When an employee leaves the system, we always audit their final pay before that final pay happens. So when you have the volume of employees that we have, there's a lot of changes that happen there, and you've seen the data on our vacancy rates. So all of those things feed into people sitting down and literally doing audits on salary pay. And at times, those audits could potentially go back up to 3 years. And so we do have a lot of processes that have to look at all the individual vouchers of an employee. So it can be very complex.
So let me ask a different way. If we know that staff is limited now, but you're able to accomplish this with all of these audits at all of these different levels with 11 people, and we estimate that because of this one change, we basically have more than a 50% increase in those number of people. That seems like a lot of people.
So 11 is just our processing of payroll. We also have the benefits team. And so the benefits team we're going to be impacted because now we're pulling benefits twice a month. So making sure the accuracy happens there. There's also a reporting and compliance team. So the reporting and compliance actually does deal with the reporting, compliance, validation. And so it is not just 2 additional to the payroll. One would be in the payroll reporting area, and the other would be in our benefits.
Okay, so the employees would be spread out over these different areas, these different
Yes.
teams?
Human resources as well.
Human resources.
Okay, that helps me understand a little better. Thank you.
But ultimately, Chair Haggerty, I know what you're getting at, and really the idea is that we do have to examine processes, and we do have to hope that upgrades in technology will make us more efficient. And so a lot of what may require more human effort, this is where we hope that future software implementations will give us that flexibility where we're more efficient and less personnel required to do the same work. But I know exactly what you're hitting at.
Appreciate that. Thank you. All right. Are there any other questions for Ms. Posey? Again, very efficient. You've dealt with just one speaker and just one slide, so thank you very much. All right. Are there any last questions from any board members about this topic? Otherwise, I believe it concludes the presentation. All right, Dr. Taylor, what's the next step here?
So when we are in our board meeting, we have an action item, and I will be recommending to the board that we implement one of the options. If you want me to tell you that now, I'll tell you. That is option B. We feel that is the balance between what the board has asked for and how we can effectively do this with the demands of employees. The only thing I'll add is that regardless of which choice the board makes, we will do pay modeling for employees ahead of time so they can see what that looks like. We will also implement various financial literacy sessions so they can better understand what may happen with changes in pay and how they can prepare for that financially. But that will be the action item that we have, option B.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Taylor. Again, we do have a very full agenda and a regular agenda and our closed session agenda. So if there are any other questions that board members have now for Dr. Taylor or for the leadership, this would be a good opportunity to ask them. But if not, Ms. Caulfield?
Are we voting on this today?
That's what Dr. Taylor was explaining. He's going to bring the recommendations. He did have the big reveal. It would be the option B, and it would be up for a board vote at tonight's meeting.
So if I could comment. and
Go ahead,
I mean,
please.
It may not be well appreciated, but it's just a concern of mine. I was going to ask about the same thing that you asked about. It just seems, I understand that there's more implementation, but we have the same amount of employees, and then we're hiring 6 more with almost $500,000 more in salaries to make sure we're efficient as we're trying to be more efficient with an upgrade.
And so hopefully, if we haven't explained it well enough, but the changes that are going to be required, and this is, now we'd be talking about 3 payroll periods, the twice monthly and then the monthly employees as well. And so that's ultimately where we would need those additional bodies to make sure all of the vetting that needs to take place, all of the additional support that's needed, will have this to happen without any hiccups.
And to just, I think he's got the right over here. The 6 positions, 2 would be in our transportation and child nutrition. So 1 for transportation, 1 for child nutrition, and that's really because now they are truly taking paper, and all of our bus drivers and timesheets, and they are doing that process twice a month now. So right now, they currently do it monthly. They're doing it for all of their staff twice a month. And so that's going to require some additional assistance in there to manage that. Because all of these are happening on top of the day-to-day. So there's day-to-day operations that continue to happen. And so the once a month, everybody knows, once a month, the end of the month, I've got timesheets and processes. So that they know I've got to make sure this is done, and this is my open period to get it done. Well, now you're doing it twice a month. And so that's similar to what you're seeing in some of the other areas. With human resources, you're now going to have longer payroll lockout periods because you've got another payroll that's going to be running. And so it's going to lock them out. So processes that they have to do with new hires, getting them entered into the system, they're going to have to work quicker, so they need more bodies to help make that and uplift that work. Because otherwise, they can't do it with the current capacity and being locked out of the system. And that's what adding some additional days. Now, as we look at efficiencies of what 12.2 could do, that may look differently. We may have limited payroll lockout days, but this is what, in our current state, as we evaluate what does the feasibility look like, this is what the feasibility looks like. And that's why you see some of those numbers come down as we really drilled into what does this day-to-day work look like, and what does an increased additional payroll run, what could that generate? And so we looked at what does it currently generate, and what additional work could it bring to those teams.
Great.
So, but we're not setting this up every month, right? Like you pretty much are setting up your employees in a system, and it's going to stay. So the only thing that's really changing twice a month would be any changes or tweaking the system?
So payroll doesn't run that way. So payroll requires that, so every employee that's on a graded position, their leave must be entered. So they have to do a timesheet. Their timesheets have to be reviewed. They have to be signed off. They also have to key any leave that employee is taken, or non-paid leave, or in collaboration with HR, if they have a leave calendar, FMLA, all of those things are processes that we manage through. So they are actually physically touching timesheet paperwork. We had talked before about potentially if we had that automatic timesheets where we were trying to get to that place. There's some things that came up with operating system updates that have to be done that we won't be able to do that right away. But eventually in the future, if we can get to having the automation of our leave in the system, the original proposal was to see those weekly. And so weekly supervisors would be approving the pay, and then by the end of the month, everything's already in the system and that could flow. We're not there with that update. And so that if and when we have that in place, that would definitely cut back on some of the paper handling and time and entry.
So
right
what's
now,
holding us up from that? Right.
So there was an operating system change, Sasha, that you brought to us.
Yeah, so I think I just want to respond to that question. Even though we're operating in an old system, I can tell you, technology services, we are working with compensation services in our teams to really identify some of the process improvements. There's a whole lot of things we are talking about lockout, but actually actively working with them to really see where's there opportunity to improve those processes, right? Going back to the time entry, obviously we are looking at, July?
That was our target.
That was the initial target, but because of this 12.2 upgrade and also the payroll frequency, we had to just put that on the back burner for now. So that was the whole plan. But again, that is something we will definitely put it back on target, and we will come back with the timeline when we're going to do that. So to answer your question, there's a lot of things we are looking for process improvements, but it's going to just take time to get there.
Okay. And I appreciate your responses and explaining all of that. I just feel like before we put all those positions in, if we have something more automated, it makes more sense to do that than it does to hire 6 more positions at that cost when you're talking about money. I'm just thinking in budget world, because I know that's coming down the road, and when we see all of our numbers start shrinking, this is making our numbers grow. So that's, so if we could do something that's more automated, it almost feels like it would kind of at least even cut that in half.
And remember, even if we are processing it twice as frequently, we're processing half the data. So while there's a net increase, each time you're processing, you're only processing half the month now instead of the full month. So it's great. I'm excited to hear about these efficiencies. I'm glad you'll continue and explore this. So thank you. All right. If there's nothing else on this one, we will move on to the gun storage resolution. Thank you, Ms. Posey, Ms. Clark, Mr. Videla, the whole team. All right. If you all remember with the board resolution on safer storage, we had good discussion on this. We went through the draft that our team had brought us, item by item, and basically we came down to the last one, the therefore be it resolved clause. We talked about our priorities and directed staff to come up with the perfect magical wording that will flawlessly capture what everyone feels. And so now we have the big reveal for that. Ms. Luton, do you need anything pulled up, or do we just want to go to assembly, or do you have it?
I can, well, so would you like me just to walk you through the changes?
Yeah, if you don't mind.
And I will get started. Okay, so I appreciate the feedback from the last meeting. I'm going to walk through what we have updated based off of our conversation. We kept the first whereas evidence strongly suggests that secure firearm storage is an essential component, the same. The second whereas, we have updated the 4.6 million to 13 million, and then added a clause on there, 4.6 of those live in a household with at least one loaded and unlocked firearm, and included the citation per the feedback from the board. The second whereas, we updated it to say more than 70% and then included that citation. Chair, would you like me to stop at the end of each of these to get feedback, or keep going?
I think keep going unless I see a hand.
And then Mr. Scott's going to come join me at the table. Thank you. All right, so the next one, whereas another 1,200 children and teens die by gun suicide each year, remains the same. The following one, in instances of gun violence on school grounds, the large majority of active shooters were current students or recent graduates. We've added, we added an up to 76% of shooters aged 12 through 18 obtained their guns from their own home, a relative's home, or friends. We did, after this was posted on Simply, get some feedback from the community that is redundant to a clause that we're going to talk about further on. So I'm going to put a pin in that, and then we'll talk about the redundancy, and we can address that. The citation is there. It is accurate. It just happens to be in two places. All right, for Mrs. Caulfield's suggestion at the last meeting that we add some mental health statistics in there, from that same citation, whereas in instances of gun violence on school grounds, more than 90% of active shooters displayed prior mental health symptoms, including depression, suicidal ideation, and anxiety. All right, the next one, whereas research shows that secure firearm storage practices are associated with up to a 32% reduction in the risk of self-inflicted and unintentional firearm deaths, added an 85% reduction in the risk of unintentional injuries among children and teens, and added the citation. The next one, whereas the U.S. Secret Service National Threat Assessment Center recommends the importance of appropriate storage of firearms, supported by a finding that 76% of school shooters used firearms acquired from the homes of parents or close relatives. And there's the redundancy. So I don't know if there is some feedback from the board on, do we keep them or do we select one versus the other?
Is there anyone with a suggestion? Ms. Edmonds?
I was trying to find, so I've got the citation, but because there's not a page reference, I wasn't sure about the age range, the 12 to 18. I'd rather to go with whichever is broader. Because, for example, the second, where we're talking about 76% of school shooters from the homes of parents or close relatives, it is also from homes of friends. So I think that's important to include that. I just don't know about the age range. I'm not questioning it, I just couldn't find it.
Yeah, the studies for this, they're interesting. There's a lot of disagreement, but it really has to do with what ages they're reporting on. Whether it's 12 to 18, 12 to 19, children, non-children.
I mean, so let's just keep the top one.
Keep the top one.
And then how do we reconcile that? Like, do we remove it from the Secret Service whereas, or?
I think we just remove that clause, supported by finding that 76% of school shooters.
Say that again, Lisa.
Remove the clause after firearm, so after firearm, period.
So then it just says the U.S. Secret Service National Threat Assessment Center recommends the importance of appropriate storage of firearms.
Right. Is that good with you? Is that good with you?
Oh, yeah, no, I just think the only reason I think we separated
Mr.
last
Rice?
time was because of...
I do have a major concern about language around mental health, and I have to speak on that because of the profession in which I work, because I understand other major organizations that focus in this. The language around more than 90% of active shooters display prior mental health symptoms. The one thing I have to say, only 4% of violent crimes are committed by people living with a mental illness. If we put emphasis like that on mental health, that's a huge stigma that we're trying to break down, barriers of stigma. And so to utilize mental health or people's disorders, to say that they're violent, hurts not only our student populations who serve in those lived experiences, but we definitely have to change that language for me around saying that they're 90%. That is, the mental health world that I serve in will have me around that. But we can, if we can change it in a way that where we're focused on mental well-being, it's fine. But to stigmatize or using stigmatizing language that people with mental health symptoms and stuff are 90% of a cause of violence, that is very harmful to
I don't think that's what this
folks.
is saying.
Hold on. Let's not interrupt each other.
Right,
one
but
at a
it
time.
directs it to that. It leads to, when we have that language in there, it says, whereas in incidents of gun violence on school grounds, more than 90% of active shooters display prior mental health symptoms, including depression, suicidal ideation, and anxiety. As a mental health person, I could bring anyone here from these major organizations and to say that language is dangerous for mental health communities and people living with depression, people living with anxiety, and people living with suicidal ideation. If we say that you're 90% of the reason why people shoot, that's what that says in this language that we're using. We're using them as a catalyst to say these individuals will be violent.
Okay, is that,
That's it.
okay. Ms. Edmonds, and then I see Ms. Caulfield.
It doesn't read that way to me at all.
Right.
Again,
Oh, I'm
please,
sorry, yeah.
just one at a time, please.
I see that, this is the research, we've got the citation, specific to incidents of gun violence on school grounds, which is a very finite thing. This is not saying that 90% of people that display mental health symptoms do anything violent. It's specific to the gun violence on school grounds.
Okay, and you have more?
No.
Okay, Ms. Caulfield?
Well, actually, I was going to kind of say both. Just the research that I have read, and if there's something else, I would love to read more on it, that there is a significant amount of children that either revisit their school or that did have prior challenges, that we just missed the signs. And for me, this paragraph is reading about paying attention to those signs. But if there was a way to, say, put suicide in there so that it is also just a reflection of, and I don't know if that changes the statistic, but I understand what you're saying, to be more sensitive in the language and how we're addressing them. But I do think it's important for parents and community members to notice the challenges that these mental health, that mental health is challenging our children. And this could be a potential risk where they are challenged so much to the point where they're frustrated, and this is something that they turn to. Because I don't think it's just about fighting. I think sometimes it's really about the struggles that these children are going through, and they're beyond frustrated, and they're beyond feeling like they have any outlet. And unfortunately, this is something that they turn to, whether it be another influence or whatever. It is, the two do kind of go hand in hand. So how could we reword it that without saying the fact that, there are many challenges with mental health, and this is one of them.
Thank you, Ms. Caulfield. We'll come back. I think you have a response, but were there any other thoughts, Mr. Hershey, did you have?
Well, would it make a difference, in your opinion, to use Ms. Edmonds' language where she said specific to incident? I know it's sort of, you can read it that way. If we said whereas specific to incidents of gun violence, would that change it at all? I don't. Okay.
We're talking about layman terms, and we're talking about people interpretation, not necessarily those of us who may have more familiarity around what we're looking at. But we're talking about indirect language and interpretations, and we're looking at data or using data that we may see to interpret people living with a mental illness. And so the language, if we could change anything, would remove the mental health, but yet focus it on what our strategic plan says, well-being. If we can find a language around well-being, or if we find a language that not naming people's disorders, that's very concerning for me. And make it, and if we can change maybe around whereas in incidents of gun violence on school grounds, students' well-being, of something of if you want to use a number, but it is very harming and damaging for this particular statement. While I do hear, as Ms. Edmonds around, we're saying on school grounds, but we're talking about our students who are living with these disorders and tagging them. They're on school grounds. And so will people be afraid as we continue to embrace well-being conversations? Are we going to allow students now to hold a place of fear that are living with these disorders, that have to speak up on May and Mental Health Awareness Month, that might share their lived experiences, but they're on school grounds. Are these students going to shoot us? Are they going to turn on us if they live with these disorders and it's happening on school grounds? So we really, really have to be concerned about that language.
I do believe I hear your concern.
Okay.
I'm struggling to come up with the language on well-being, but Ms. Johnson-Hostler, I think, has a thought.
Yeah, I do. And this is one of those great points where Ms. Caulfield has picked up my favorite saying, which is both and are true. I can see how you're both reading it that way. I guess what I'm going to say is exactly, you just both used the words, is I agree with you. I mean, there's already a ton of stigma attached, but I do also think it's appropriate that we acknowledge that there are red flags of students' social and emotional well-being. And I think we can just articulate it using the language that is very familiar with schools, which is not calling out a diagnosis, a clinical diagnosis, but actually noting that that's how a kid's mental well-being is how we use that language. We don't really use mental health, and we don't use diagnosis because we only have a few staff who can actually use clinical diagnosis. We use social and emotional well-being. So we'd have to change the language a tad bit because you have it attached to data points, but I do think it's also important to use the language that's familiar with the school, which generally is less likely to be mental health unless they're seeing a mental health professional.
So the question I would ask is that whatever the new wording might be, that you are suggesting that we drop any of the identifications such as depression, suicidal ideation, and anxiety. Is that kind of what you're suggesting?
It sounds like
yes,
that.
because
And
and
so,
I
go
hear
ahead,
it,
Ms.
yeah.
Rose.
And honestly, I literally just trained trained Cumberland County Schools in mental health first aid just yesterday in their staff. And so that's why when I saw this number, it's like, no, data only says 4% may do that. Is it important that parents are aware of signs and symptoms? Yes, but the wording, we just have to change, if we can, please. More than 90% is just very stigmatizing.
So, if I may.
Yes, please.
What would you think if it said something along the lines, because the difficulty with the citation is you have to stay true to the number, but I feel your argument about the associated stigma and the harm it could do. So what if it said something along the lines of, were an incidents of gun violence on school grounds, more than 90% of active shooters displayed observable symptoms or behaviors of, and then, challenges to their mental well-being, or something that gets to that more preferred language rather than, as Dr. Taylor was saying, calling out specific illnesses which we don't want to stigmatize.
I can agree with that. More than 90% of active shooters displayed well-being challenges, not mental, but well-being challenges, because we have to remember something that I said yesterday in the class. People who commit acts of violence don't necessarily have a mental diagnosis. They may have had other barriers in their life that cause them to behave in such manner. And so those prior mental health symptoms could be anger, but anger from what? Whatever may have happened in their home, but it doesn't mean they have a mental diagnosis. And so when we talk about the symptoms and a diagnosis, those are different things. And so it points to their well-being, and that well-being could be inclusive to other barriers. So 90% of active shooters displayed prior well-being challenges. prior well-being challenges, because that well-being is true. It could be mental well-being, it could be emotional, environmental well-being.
I would prefer using social and emotional only because
Yes.
it does get to the concerns we
Social,
have,
right.
which
I
is
can
like
do social
suicidal
and emotion,
ideation.
yes.
Like, it's the symptoms of a clinical diagnosis is social and emotional well-being.
Right.
So that's why I'm recommending we use
And
it.
So that's what
I
I
agree
wrote
with
down.
social, because it's not all
Yeah.
Right.
emotional.
It's not.
Social factors are creating those barriers.
Okay. And again, just for I agree with Ms. Johnson-Hostler's thought too, and I appreciate your dialogue on this. Dr. Ng, did you have a thought?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. We should remove any diagnosis because, I mean, you're talking about, psychiatric DSM-4 diagnosis criteria and all that.
I didn't even say DSM-4.
There is not.
DSM-5.
Well,
But y'all
DSM-5
think
now.
it was with you.
Yeah, but I mean, there's definitely not something that is, it's beyond
Our scope of work.
our scope, right.
So knowing that we are time challenged and we have challenges to our temporal well-being, what I'd like to do is turn this over to Chief Luton with any input from Dr. Taylor to see if you have a recommendation for us.
So I just wrote down what was said, displayed social, emotional well-being challenges. Would that be the wording that would satisfy?
All right, Ms. Edmonds, you have a
I
comment?
just want to know what this does to the citation.
So I'm going to, after we stop, we will go back and read it, but I feel like from my prior understanding, it would be accurate.
I mean, in communication world, it doesn't for us to cite it, even though it's different language, that's okay?
Yeah, I think that's fine, yeah.
All right, Ms. Caulfield, last
I
comment.
just to what everybody's saying at the table, and I hear all the points are very valid. But I feel like if you say social emotional, it's really open to interpretation versus the specificness of parents being aware, because often they are, and community members too, often when interviewed afterward, and you read the interviews, the family, friends, parents, nobody had any idea that it would even get to that, because they weren't aware and they weren't paying attention, and they just thought, well, that's not going to happen. That never entered their mind. So how does, when we're talking about safety and storage of guns and everything, how do we bring that awareness without using the language? I understand that it's going to cause upset, like the language to stigma and label them, but how do we make people aware of the real dangers at the same time without using that language?
I believe Ms. Luton has a...
So, Ms. Caulfield, when you said that, it sparked something in me that I'm sorry I missed from the last meeting. Your last statement, be it therefore resolved that the board directs the superintendent. What you're really asking is less about the statistics, but more about directing staff to provide mental health and social emotional resources to parents, because this is about prevention. So my suggestion is that last sentence in the last, be it therefore resolved, we would remove the and, so it would be improperly stored firearms, comma, best practices for secure gun storage is reviewed by local law enforcement partners, comma, and we would be providing families with information and resources on mental and behavioral health resources.
Okay.
All right.
Sounds good.
That's fair. And we're already, I'm sorry,
No.
Chair.
Go ahead, please.
And just for the record, we're doing that already in our district with Dr. Corliss leading our folks and training our staff in youth mental health first aid and teen mental health first aid. So we have those, and maybe we can look at that another time, of expanding that to really train and equip family to really see that curriculum is specifically for seeing signs and symptoms.
Thank you. I think that's a good reminder. All right, Ms. Luton?
Okay, so whereas across the country, lawmakers, community members, this is the one about the NC Safe clause. So we've added, and the Be Smart program, which is endorsed by the National Parent Teacher Association and the North Carolina Pediatric Society, and which encourages secure gun storage practices. So we've added that language. Whereas, so the next clause remains the same. The next clause, whereas keeping students, teachers, staff, and families safe from the threat of gun violence should be the responsibility of all adult stakeholders, period. We removed that of limiting that to just those in the school building. And then the last one, you all had a lot of discussion about the timing of providing information and resources. We discussed it with our staff, and where we felt comfortable was regularly and consistently. This is something that's in our hearts to do, and it's also in our communication planning, and regularly and consistently shows that the communication patterns that we'll do and the tactics and the efforts that we will have will be ongoing and consistent in order for them to be effective. So we've added that phrase, and then we just have added the comma and mental and behavioral health resources to the end.
All right,
To the
thank
very
you,
end
Ms.
of that
Lewin.
last. Okay.
Yep, so it will be as reviewed by local law enforcement partners, comma, and mental and behavioral health resources.
All right, does everyone have that last change? All right then, so we have our resolution. Are there any final questions about the resolution for either Ms. Luton or Mr. Scott? I praise Ms. Posey for her efficiency answering only one question. Mr. Scott, you got away with 0 questions.
My favorite part of being
If I can just have
Please.
the privilege of adding, so one of the things that has been really great coming out of this initiative is just the conversations that we've had with our local law enforcement partners. I remember when Mr. Scott took office, that was one of his priorities, to build on the relationships with law enforcement partners, to have better communication, to really leverage their skill set and their support of our schools to benefit our families. And we have definitely seen that in this project, in our relationships and our ability to be able to rely on them for information and for resources. So this is the start. What will come out of this, we've had a lot of promising meetings about some of the activities that we will do in conjunction with local law enforcement. And so I just have to say publicly thank you for all of that.
Thank you very much for your kind words, Ms. Lee.
Thank you. Just to give everyone a little bit of an orientation, what we will do is when this does come up, we will read the resolution. We will also have an opportunity for remarks from some of our law enforcement partners that are here. We'll have an opportunity for everyone to sign the resolution. We will take a brief recess to allow questions from the media, to allow everyone who's there to sign it to kind of get there, sign it, let the law enforcement officers answer questions that they might have, and just to transition out to the rest of our meeting because we do have a full agenda. Are there any questions about the resolution at this time? Otherwise, it will be finalized, so we can get the final version put before you in a matter of minutes. All right?
Good job, thanks.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Luton. All right. At this point in time in our work session, we do have a little bit of time left. I would like to ask if I could entertain a motion for us to move into closed session to consider confidential personal information under General Statute 143, 318, 111A6, and 115C319, to consider confidential student information protected under General Statute 115C42 and the Federal Education Rights and Privacy Act, to consult with the Board of Education attorney, preserve attorney-client privilege, and formulate plans relating to the prevention of school violence and the development of emergency plans under North Carolina General Statute 143, 31811, and to consult with the Board of Education attorney and preserve the attorney-client privilege as provided in General Statute 143, 31811 to other legal matters.
So moved. Second.
We have a motion from Mr. Hershey, a second from Mr. Swanson. All in favor of moving into closed session, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we are now in closed session. We will give everyone a minute.